everyone. It's Catherine Jelinek with the Skinny Platform, and I'm thrilled today to be here with Dan Wallace to share with us about his nugget from being an EOS implementer. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Catherine, how are you?
Doing great. So let's dive in. What is your nugget?
My nugget is that simplifying what we're asking people to do in EOS down to its most bare bones element, it comes down to your ability to win the week, and that winning the week is four things, and we'll talk in a minute about what those four things are. And then if you can do those four simple things on a regular basis, you win. So that's where we're headed.
Win the week. All
Win the
right.
week.
So what are those four things?
Those four things are, so what does it take to win the week? Let me back up. Can I, and
Yeah,
just sort of set context for this. A
great.
few years ago, more than a few years ago, a wonderful EOS implementer by the name of Kurt Schneeber at one of our quarterly QCE meetings uh, talked about how we asked people to set a 10-year target and a 3-year picture and a 1-year plan, and that to win your 10-year target, metaphorically, because we don't actually do it year by year, but metaphorically, you have to win your 3-year picture 3 times. And that to win a 3-year picture, you have to win your 1-year plan 3 times. And to win a 1-year plan, you have to win your quarter. And that stuck with me, and I've used that a lot with clients to help them get clarity that we set these big lofty goals, but that achieving them comes down to much more near term or short term execution. And at some point, I heard somebody else use the phrase "win the week." That phrase didn't originate with me, but it was sort of undefined. And I would put those two things together and started telling my clients, not only to get to your 10-year, yes, you have to win your 3-year 3 times. To do that, you have to win your 1-year 3 times. To do that, you got to win a quarter 4 times. How do you win a quarter? You win 13 weeks in a row. And that's really at the core of what we teach. So that helps them connect the dots between the long-term, more lofty goals and the near-term execution. But then the question comes down to what do you have to do to win the week? And my nugget is that you can simplify it to four things. First thing is hit your numbers. You have a scorecard. Scorecard has some weekly numbers on it. Those numbers are the things that you do to stay on track to hitting your quarterly revenue and profit goals. Hit your numbers. Second thing you have to do is keep your rocks on track. So we picked a set of projects that are how we go about creating new capabilities in the business and building toward the future. Got to keep those on track, make a week's worth of progress every week. The third thing you got to do is get your weekly to-dos done. So in our weekly level 10 meetings, our teams are typically assigning themselves to-dos. It really boils down to this. If we can't hold ourselves accountable for doing small things on a 7-day basis, we're going to have a really hard time holding ourselves accountable for doing big things on a 90-day basis.
Mhm.
Got to get your to-dos done. And the fourth thing is do a really good job of solving the issues that came up during the week that are getting in the way. So win the week, four things: hit your numbers, keep your rocks on track, get your to-dos done, solve your issues. Can't strip it down any further than that. If your fundamental business strategy and plan are good and you do these four things week in, week out, you'll win. You can't.
I love breaking it down to the basics like that. It reminds me of that adage about, the journey of 1,000 steps begins with one, or the
A
march.
thousand miles begins with a single step, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Well, and we talk in EOS about less is more, and we mean it, but there's a lot of content in EOS, and it's possible to kind of get lost in there. I've got this tool and that tool. When am I using what tool? And I find sometimes it helps to just strip it down to its most bare essentials, and to say, we're going to get in a room once a week, and we're going to ask ourselves some questions. What are the most important questions? We had some numbers we were supposed to hit last week. And the numbers, by the way, represent, fundamentally, they represent activities which are reflective of human effort and which help us know if we are on track to hitting our revenue and profit goals for the quarter and maybe a few other numbers. That's really what they're for. We asked, did we execute? Did we hit those numbers last week? Which means that the machine's running well and we're doing our jobs. We picked some really important projects. Did we make a week's worth of progress on them? Those are the two most important things we do in that weekly meeting, is check to see if those things are on track and figure out if they're not, what do we have to do to get them back on track. And then the other two things go right along with it. Short-term accountability. Can we hold ourselves accountable for actually doing small things that we said we were going to do in the next 7 days? And can we do a great job of getting roadblocks out of the way? Because roadblocks pop up every week in every business. So, we don't have to make it any more complicated than that. And I do find that sometimes just stripping away, everything that's everything but the absolute essentials just helps people get clear on what they need to focus on.
It does. It brings a lot of clarity to feel, and it feels controllable. It feels like you can put your hands around it rather than
Mm-hmm.
the big lofty goal that's so far away.
Right. And when you're distracted during the week doing all kinds of other stuff, maybe it gives you something you can come back to and ask, are we doing what we have to do to win the week? And
I
if
really
this isn't
appreciate
helping us win the week, we need to stop and ask, why are we doing?
it. So, Dan, how many years have you been working with other companies as an EOS implementer now?
Just past my 14th anniversary.
Yes, I thought I saw 13 plus. So
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you've been with some clients then for several years, I'm guessing. And do you have any examples to pull in of teams that have consistently either won the week, or maybe it's the other side of the example where it's they've fallen off track and then lost, you know, the ability to aim for those longer term goals? Do you have an example from some of your longer term clients to tie together to this nugget?
Yeah, I could think of a couple that are good examples to share. It's interesting. We say, longer term clients, the way it's played. We tell people going in, plan on about 2 years,
Mm,
and over time, I've had a handful that have dropped out much. I've had a few that dropped out very early, like they got into it and realized it really wasn't for them, or I wasn't for them. I've had a few people, go for about a year and say, we've got what we want to get from an outsider. We're going to be on our own. That's happened a few times. I've never actually had anybody just do the 2 laps around the track thing.
interesting.
Everybody else has stayed at least 3 years, and I've got, I think, 5 that have been with me more than 6 years. I've got a couple of 7 to 8 year
Wow. Wow.
clients, and it's I love them. They seem to love me, or at least like me well enough to keep me coming back. Um, what the ones that I think of, my favorite one on this particular nugget, the clients we have that are using software to third party software to manage their EOS stuff. I get to see the results of their level 10 meeting.
Hmm.
The software will send out a summary, and one of them in the headlines section, one day I looked at it and it said, "Win the week is fantastic." That was good to see, to know that it had gotten that traction. And in their case, was a professional services firm, and an important aspect of winning the week for them was getting all of their professional staff engaged in business development, and not just leaving it to 1 or 2 people to do.
Hmm.
And they had created playbooks and processes. And so what win the week meant for them, they were already really good at doing the work. They were really good at doing the work. They were better at doing the work than they were at selling the work. And so what this did was help them really get focused on the weekly numbers that everybody has to hit to make sure everybody's doing their part. And they were not expecting junior professional staff members to bring in big clients, but they expect everybody to just be having conversations along the way. Who else in your company might need something from us? And they started holding themselves accountable for doing that. So that was certainly a win. And then, I think of a couple of clients that I have that are longstanding, that they've been on a long journey, very different journeys, but on a long journey to really get focused in on these two things. Did we hit our numbers? Yes or no? And one of them, well, neither one of them really had great numbers to begin with. They're quite large companies. They're bigger than our typical clients are. Over time, it drove them to do a better job of measuring things, and then turn that into better scorecards and better weekly metrics. And the clarity of separating, this is what the numbers are doing for us, and this is what the rocks are doing for us, that seemed to help them as well. and to understand, we know how we did this week in terms of making product, shipping product, getting orders, et cetera. It's just a handful of numbers that tell us that, and getting really dialed in on that. It just created a lot of clarity. And the more clarity, the more focus, the better the results. And so both of them are companies I've seen go through some struggling times, and they're both just absolutely hitting on all cylinders right now.
Wow, fantastic. And to have that clarity and accountability across the team week to week, I mean, how could that not
Right.
filter into something much bigger?
Yep.
Can I ask a follow up question about the benefit of a week versus a month? I feel like sometimes in some companies, measuring something every single week can almost feel like, I don't know, like a month could be beneficial for certain metrics and certain
Mm-hmm.
goals. Tell me
Yep.
about your views on that and why you're selecting win the week specifically.
What a wonderful question. So first off, I'm picking win the week. I pick the week as the increment of time because that's the increment of time that EOS has people work in. We don't have a monthly meeting in EOS.
Okay.
We expect our clients to have a monthly meeting to review their financials because accrual accounting systems, we typically close the books every month, and so that's a standard. And we expect people to do that. But what you'll find is the stuff that comes up day to day in a business, if it goes more than about a week and lingers and doesn't get addressed and doesn't get solved, it's going to turn into a bigger problem. And a lot of things can't wait that long. So this is really about why the weekly level 10 cadence is weekly. What's going to happen is we teach this discipline that when the issue pops into your head, unless you absolutely positively must have an answer right now, put it on your issues list and know that you're never more than a few days away from a level 10 meeting with your team where you can get the help or the answer that you need. And part of what we're doing there is we're helping people learn to not interrupt each other all the time. One of the things we know is that the productivity tax from having to task switch is really high. So you're head down working on something, someone pops into your doorway, knocks on your door and says, "Hey, you got a minute?" And they've just killed an hour of your productivity, even if they only need you for 5 minutes. And so we want to minimize the amount people do that. If these things don't get solved in a reasonably prompt manner, then people are going to be interrupting each other all the time, or they won't be, and small problems will turn into large problems. And if you look around the world at businesses that run in a strong systematic cadence, you'll see that they have at the slowest, they have a weekly meeting pulse or meeting cadence. Technology companies who use Agile rely more heavily on a daily, they call it the huddle or the stand up. It's a daily meeting at the start of every day. What did we do yesterday? What are we planning to do today? What's getting in the way? Ours is a slightly richer agenda than that, and weekly is the most common. The story that I share with you about that comes from a client I had who's a home builder, and their head of operations was a super super strong team member. She's great, and one of the numbers she owned on their scorecard is a number called margin at acceptance. And that's the gross margin built into the home at the time the buyer signs the contract to have the home built. And that number will change while the home is being built. And it can go up or down, but for the most part, it comes down. For the most part, things turn out to be products or building materials wind up, prices go up, things wind up being more expensive than expected.
Mm-hmm.
When it was a monthly number, which is what it was before we got involved, before we started doing EOS, what seemed to happen to her was that for the first couple of weeks of the month, she wouldn't press that hard to make sure that they were getting their number. And this is really a pricing thing. And because, see, I have the rest of the month to make it up. And then the last couple of weeks of the month, she'd realize that she was behind, and then she'd be pressing really hard and asking for more than she could get. And so she rarely made that number when it was monthly. Simply shifting that number to weekly meant that she had to pay attention to every deal. And she did, and she made reasonable requests in the company that were in the company's interest. And she started hitting that number week after week after week. And that was, $1 million in profit to the company
Wow.
just from shifting from monthly to weekly.
Wow. That is an excellent example. I feel like feels like a good positive warning for the benefits of keeping on this weekly
Yeah.
focus rather than letting it slip because you're so right that when you go to monthly about any goal, it feels like not eminent, not
Right.
relevant to each day.
Yep. There's something about a week. There's certain cadences that just work with this. There's something about a week that, like, you can't ignore it, and a month is just long enough that you can. And similarly, for project oriented stuff for rocks, 90 days is just turns out to be kind of a magic time frame. It just works. The other thing I'd say about what numbers you measure on what frequency is that you want to measure something at the finest level of granularity or highest level of frequency that you can, and have the measurement yield valuable results, useful results. So if something doesn't happen often enough to make weekly measure meaningful, or it happens weekly but it's so volatile from one week to the next that weekly measurement just gives you noise. If you look at a scorecard and you want an average of 200 a week, and what you get is 0, 0, 10, 2, 500,
Mm.
37, 2, 0, 8, that's not going to tell you anything. You can look at an average and it will sort of tell you if you're getting close to that average. But measuring that weekly is not really useful. So that's probably something better measured on a monthly basis.
So
It
for
needs to
something,
happen. It needs to happen often enough and with enough consistency that that weekly measurement actually tells you.
okay, I appreciate that discernment that some things aren't as valuable in a weekly cadence to be measured, and you have to just
And
follow
it's
that.
one of the tests that we ask people to think about when they're coming up with scorecard numbers. Is this a number that will be helpful to look at weekly? And if not, where are you going to look at it? So, yeah, I think most of our clients, some explicitly have monthly scorecards, like 90.io, for example, has a monthly scorecard in it, in addition to the weekly one. So many of my clients who use it have some monthly numbers. In other cases, because we ask them we encourage them to do a monthly financial review. We said, pick monthly numbers, just append those, attach those to your monthly reporting package, put them in there.
Good idea. So, as a final question, if there's a company that's kind of feeling off track and feels a little past, not winning the week regularly or feeling a little off track with their longer term goals, what do you suggest to them to regain that feeling of momentum and accountability and control with how they're able to approach their numbers and getting back on track?
That's a wonderful question, and I don't know if you intended that to be a really big question, but it is.
Okay.
Okay, so there are a couple things. The first is you got to go back and look at the longer term goals and make sure that this is something we really, really genuinely want. There's kind of a gut check thing for the team to do, and there are times when I'll go around the room and I'll poll the team. Are you all in? Are you all in? Are you all in? And if you're not, you got to tell the team. No lying. And we get what we can from that. We want to make sure that we have goals that make sense, plans that make sense, and that people really are bought into the notion they want to help create that. And then that we've done a good job of breaking those things down into smaller pieces that are executable in shorter time frames. That's sort of at the bigger picture end of it, and then pulling it back to the shorter picture, to the narrower time frame. There are a couple things that I do in my sessions. I don't know that others do, but to really get people to focus on. So first thing is to focus on are we trying to do the right stuff? Every quarter, we'll look at their revenue. I don't know how much you know about how this works, but when we review a quarter, the first thing we do is look at the handful of numbers they picked: revenue, profit, maybe a few other numbers, and just ask, did you make them or miss them over the last 90
Mm-hmm.
days? And when we do that, I will take them back to their scorecard and just we'll look at what's red versus green on the scorecard and ask, why was this red all or most weeks in the quarter? What was the story there? But we'll also have a conversation about, if these numbers were all green, would you be confident you would have made all of those numbers? Week to week, is it helping you feel like you are on track to achieve those quarterly numbers you set? So I spend a fair amount of time going back to the scorecard with my clients, more than is, I think, typical in EOS, I'll also, when we review rocks in every quarterly, after we've done the scorekeeping on completion rates, I'll ask them three questions. The first, which are, do you feel like you set the right rocks? And I'm looking for a general sense. Do we pick the right stuff that's important? Sometimes we don't. Second is, did you work on them early and consistently across the quarter, or did you procrastinate and cram? And of course, win the week will help with the we procrastinated and crammed. If they're
Yes.
being reasonably honest and they're on track, off track reporting, hopefully it will help. The level 10 will help catch that. And the third is, did you work on them enough, which means you were able to pry yourself out of the day-to-day sort of turning of the crank of getting work, doing work, etc. Were you able to pry yourself out of the day job enough to be able to put the time you needed to into rocks? So we'll sort of do that as a test to make sure that we're doing the right stuff and that we're operating fundamentally properly on that. And there's a thing that I encourage, so maybe this is sort of an additional nugget, to really hold ourselves accountable in the level 10.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do here is to go from biggest picture to sort of middle picture to ground level. So at ground level, in the level 10, what I encourage my clients to do when a scorecard number, somebody misses a scorecard number or reports your rock is off track, is to ask three questions. So let's say that it's you, Catherine, and you missed a number, you have a rock off track.
Okay.
If I'm the team's integrator, I'm going to turn to you when we IDS that issue, and I'm going to encourage that issue, any missed number or off track rock, should be high priority for IDS. I'm going to ask you three questions. First question is, what happened last week that caused you to miss that number or cause that rock to go off track? What's that about? We speak the truth to each other. We need an honest assessment of what happened. Second question, what are you planning to do this week to get it back on track? And we're going to look for a specific to do. What action are you going to take this week to get it back on track? That's a reminder that you still own this and we still expect you to get it done. And the third question is, how can we help? We're a team. We love you. We're here to support you. So if there's anything we can do to help you with that, we're here to do it. So three questions. What happened last week? What are you planning to do this week? And how can we help you? And to inject that level of rigor in every missed scorecard number and every off-track rock will really turn up the level of accountability. Honestly, oftentimes, a rock is off track, a scorecard number gets missed, and they look at it, they shrug, and they move on. And that is just antithetical to what we're trying to get them to do, and it is antithetical to winning the week. So we have got to get them to focus on those two things.
What I heard with rigor, accountability, and discipline are really at the core of what winning the week creates that within a team when they're really following it.
Right. Without making it super complicated. You've each got a handful of numbers you got to bring home every week. You've each got a handful of rocks you got to move forward every week. You each took on a couple of to-dos last week. And you each brought a few issues to the meeting. Let's just clean up that stuff. And if we do, we should be in good shape.
Dan, thank you so much. This was very insightful, very detailed. I really appreciate the stories and the depth with this on winning the week. Wonderful. Well, have a great rest of your day, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This episode of the Podcast of Nuggets is presented by the Skinny Platform and is released in support of Freedom Reads, a national nonprofit opening handcrafted, curated 500-book libraries in prison cell blocks across America. Freedom libraries are more than just books. They are lifelines. They bring connection, hope, and dignity to prisons. Learn more at freedomreads.org. Freedom begins with a book.